Iranian hegemony in the region, and obviously their relationship of the Iranians with the Russians, you see what might have been unthought of just a number of years ago, and that's a coalition that has emerged between Israel, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the Saudis, the Emirates, unprecedented cooperation and a new alliance emerging.
Well, it's interesting. That alliance really came together and coalesced around the fight against ISIS. But look at where the U.S. has air bases. The U.S. has a large air bases in Qatar as well as UAE. There are, and then, of course, there's the Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. We've just learned, Sean, from U.S. defense officials that B-1 bombers were used in these strikes. That's the first we've heard that aircraft, that the Air Force was involved. Those B-1 bombers typically fly out of Qatar, and those B-1 bombers would be coming in, their stealth, and they would be coming into those Damascus suburbs, if you will. We're hearing that there are explosions also in Homs, the larger Syrian city to the north, and it's not clear right now exactly what the targets are, but those targets in the capital are designed to send a very clear message to Bashar Assad. As John reported, and we've been reporting, this was a very different menu of options that the military presented to the president this time. It was a broader menu of options because last time they were trying to deter Bashar Assad with those 59 Tomahawk missiles, 58 strikes on that one air base, but it did not, he obviously did not get the message. It's really a bit of irony that we've been reporting. It was exactly 1 year to the day that he carried out a chemical strike on his own people. It was almost as though he was daring the U.S. to do something. He believes, I believe, that with the Russians at air bases across his country and Iranian forces on the ground, he thought the U.S. would not strike. But you heard Mike Pompeo at his confirmation hearing to be the next Secretary of State actually taunt the Russians and say, look, the U.S. killed hundreds of Russians not long ago on the ground in Syria when they challenged a U.S. base out in the eastern part of the country. So it's clear that the U.S., French, and British were not going to stand by and allow these chemical weapons to be used. We will get a bomb damage assessment at some point. It'll probably take until first light before the Pentagon can actually see with satellites and other imagery what they actually hit. But it was notable, Sean, that the president said that this would be a sustained effort of military, economic, as well as diplomatic effort, a sustained effort to stop Bashar Assad from using chemical weapons ever again. Does that mean that this goes on in the coming days? It's notable that the French president reached out to the Russian president today, offering that olive branch, saying that they want to find a diplomatic solution to the civil war in Syria. Now, in these recent days, we also have noted that as more time went on, the Syrian Air Force was moved to protection at the Russian air base at Latakia. So the Syrians have been trying to protect some of their key assets in the last few days after it was telegraphed that some sort of strike was coming. Sean?
All right, Jennifer Griffin, thank you. We're going to stay on those images. We're seeing the first images of the British Air Force now literally taking off from their bases in Cyprus, a coalition of Great Britain, the UK, France, and, of course, the United States tonight. And as you look at some of the comments the president said, one thing that you have to acknowledge, not very many people were talking about a coalition here of the willing, although, of course, France and Great Britain had publicly condemned what had happened here. But what you can see is the president's foreign policy. Obviously, it's been temperate, clear, very resolute, and purposeful and measured. And I don't care if we're talking about North Korea. Now we have Kim Jong-un talking about the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. In the case of the concessions that China made in the last week as it relates to trade and tariffs and intellectual property rights. And then, of course, a direct message to Russia, Iran, and now Syria. Obviously, the world is watching all of this as it unfolds here. And as the president said, we can't purge the world of evil or evil acts everywhere because there's tyranny. No amount of American blood or treasure can produce a lasting peace and security in the Middle East. It's a troubled place. We'll try to make it better, but it is a troubled place. And again, the president mentioned that these would be precision airstrikes that are taking place with this coalition tonight as we are on the air. Joining us now live from Washington is Chief Washington, D.C. Bureau White House correspondent Ed Henry is with us. Ed, I hear you have some new news.
Yeah, Sean, you're talking about the coalition, the U.S., the Brits, the French. We have just in the last moment or two gotten a statement, in fact, from President Macron in France talking about that coalition. I won't read the long statement, but part of it says the facts and the responsibility of the Syrian regime are beyond doubt. The red line set by France in May 2017, harkening back to that last big chemical weapons attack, has been crossed. And so that's from President Macron tonight, talking about this alliance between these key allies. And in terms of that alliance, you have all kinds of congressional reaction pouring in the last few moments, most of it very supportive of the president's military action tonight. Senator Orrin Hatch, a very senior Republican, obviously saying in part, quote, the response deliberated meticulously with international partners and carried out with their backing and participation reflects the president's commitment to restoring America's leadership and bringing Assad and his backers to justice. I should note there are some voices on the Hill tonight, Republican and Democrat, saying they do not believe that President Trump should have moved forward without specific authorization from Congress, that coming from Republican Thomas Massie of Kentucky, as well as Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California. She has long been out there as being against any U.S. military action, though we should note. And what the Trump White House is going to say in the days ahead is, while there's not a specific authorization for this military action tonight, they will hearken back to the authorization of the use of force post 9/11 that was passed on a bipartisan basis by Congress over the global war on terror. That is something that was not just used by the Bush administration, but it was used by the Obama administration, and now tonight being used by the Trump administration as well. So you'll hear some of those voices of dissent. We should note that as well. But many top Republicans, we haven't heard from Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi yet. We expect we will soon. But most senior Republicans on the Hill tonight saying they are very supportive of the president and very supportive that he put this coalition together, Sean.
All right, Ed Henry, I also had a private conversation with Senator Lindsey Graham. He'd been very, very encouraging to the president to go ahead and follow up on this action. Our reaction is Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Colonel North, President making very clear tonight what this is about. This is about a precision strikes to send a message and a deterrent to stop the use of chemical weapons as the brutality and the evil, and to use the president's own words here when he talked, frankly, passionately tonight about all this, that it is barbarism and brutality on display that we have been witness with men, women, and children.
Sean, last night on your show, I laid out the target list. It looks like I guessed right. I certainly haven't talked to anybody in the administration, but I said if there's going to be an attack that's going to deter the further use of chemical weapons by the Syrians, it had to be something more than a one-off like last April. And it clearly looks like that's what the case is going to be in this. It's got to hit economic targets. It's got to take out the command and control nodes in Damascus. It's got to first take out, as they did, the surface-to-air missile defenses, which the Russians put in. And just further to the comment that Ed just made, look, when Ronald Reagan, 32 years ago, did the same thing to Muammar Gaddafi with strikes out of Great Britain and off the Navy carriers, he didn't go to Congress and beg for permission. He just did it. And then went to Congress and said, here's why I did it. And I hope that's what the president does tomorrow after the dust settles a little bit. And if necessary, continues to strike at those targets that are going to make sure that this Assad regime cannot do this again. That means going after the seaports. That means going after cratering all those runways and the command and control. And I'll tell you, if the Russians persist in this effort to deny us the use of our intelligence and surveillance assets, meaning the so-called drones and satellites, we've got the capacity in our military to shut the communications down for the Assad regime and the Russian and Iranian patrons, so they'll have to communicate with carrier pigeons. If that's what they want, they're going to keep trying to interfere with our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance.
Yeah, Colonel, stand by. We'll get back to you in a minute. Prime Minister of Great Britain, Theresa May, has just released a statement that this evening I authorized British armed forces to conduct coordinated targeted strikes to degrade the Syrian regime's chemical weapons capability and to deter their use. We're acting together with our American and French allies. And then she went on about the chemical weapons attack that killed up to 75 people, including young children, in circumstances of pure horror. The fact that this attack should surprise no one. Mike Tobin has some new information. He's in our Israeli bureau tonight. Mike.
And, Sean, what we're hearing from Arab TV, a number of different sources coming over Arab TV say this first wave, anyway, lasted about 15 minutes. And they are reporting that at least 2 structures were hit downtown Damascus. One of them has been identified as a scientific research center. And as you get into the potential of propaganda, you have to be really skeptical when you hear something called the Scientific Research Center. Watch that and see how it develops as they're talking about attacking or targeting facilities that could produce or support chemical weapons. Well, something could very well be labeled the Scientific Research Center. So I'm very skeptical with that bit of information, but it's a bit of the identification of some of the targets that have been hit. And it also goes along with what we're hearing now from Elysee Palace, as they say the coalition is now directed at the clandestine chemical arsenal. More specifically, they say the strikes will be limited to the capabilities of the Syrian regime for the production of chemical weapons. So this is some of the first reporting that we're getting out of Damascus right now. A couple of targets that have been identified. A little skeptical on the identification. It could very well be a dual purpose type of facility or even a fabricated name. Sean?
All right. Mike Tobin in Israel tonight. As you can see on the screen, those are British jets taking off from Cyprus just earlier before the strikes. We're getting reports from the AP, loud explosions, and the skies of Syria around Damascus now being lit up tonight. Here with more reaction to this breaking news, we have Fox News contributor Sarah Carter. We do have other news to bring you tonight. Dr. Sebastian Gorka and former Brigadier General Tony Tata is with us. General, if you look at it and you look at the statements from Great Britain and France tonight and the president tonight, it seems like everybody's on the same page. This is a deterrence. These are precision strikes. This is to send a message. But also the president did send a larger message tonight, which was to Vladimir Putin and Russia. On the one hand, an olive branch. On the other hand, basically, who would ever want to be friends with people that treat